from the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is AgDay.
Coming up on AgDay, from the heartwarming
And I think this represents the agricultural industry as a whole.
to trade,
And I say affectionately, the farmers are going to have to go out and buy much larger tractors because it means a lot of business.
from a wet spring that meant late planting
That kind of tells you how wet our ground is, and this ground is tiled.
to a late harvest.
Hell. Plain and simple.
This morning, we look back on what's been a wild year in farm country.
AgDay, presented by the Chevy Silverado and the all-new Silverado HD, the strongest, most advanced family of Silverados ever.
Good morning, I'm Clinton Griffiths. Thank you for joining us for this special edition of AgDay as we take a look back at the biggest stories of 2019. And there was no shortage of stories to cover this year in farm country, from trade wars to planting and harvest delays, all combining to make it a year no one will soon forget. We began with the weather and what started the tough growing season for many farmers. Nebraska suffering one of its worst natural disasters in state history after a bomb cyclone hit the area in March. Michigan Farm Bureau and Ag Community Relief made a trip to Verdigris, Nebraska to hear for themselves the stories from the storm.
6 a.m. sharp, somebody from the dam called and said he needed to evacuate now.
Fifth-generation cattle rancher Clint Pischel lives near the Niobrara River.
I told him, I says, I got cows, I got calves that I know are on that river bottom. And they said, you don't have time, you need to evacuate now and get to high ground.
Newlyweds, he and his wife hunted their belongings in the dark and waited.
And when it came, the wall of ice came with it, it all happened within 30 seconds. I guess my best way to describe it is like an ocean. It had to have been 30 foot deep.
You know what? I can't run very fast anymore, but I'll tell you what, I move faster than normal. That's as fast as it come. I mean, it was on top of us.
Nearby, the Rajitskas were dealing with the same wall of water and ice.
But I could see that I lost everything. I lost everything. Buildings, most of the buildings are gone, my hay.
In a moment, both families losing generations worth of work, their homes and their livelihoods erased by the storm.
Anything that was down there was gone. There was some calves laying on the banks.
The ice piled up against the gate. We couldn't get them out. We couldn't get them out of there. We would have taken a caterpillar to get them out. And so when this second round come, it drowned them.
Kind of just want to lay your head down and just give up for a little bit there, but
the kindness of strangers
90% of the people that come to help, I've never met them. I don't know them.
is helping these families weather the storm. Hay, feed, and supplies from people across the country is pouring in, like that from Ag Community Relief out of Michigan, including handwritten cards from kids urging them to be strong and don't give up.
you know, it could have been worse. I know Willard and them, they got hit hard, they lost everything. What I lost is hurts financially big time, but nothing like them. They don't got a house to go home to.
Both families now steadfast in their resolve, if not for themselves, driven by the goodness of neighbors.
I'm not going to waste that energy that these people, time and energy that they've already sacrificed to help me. If I walk away now, that would be the wrong thing. That would be the wrong thing. That would be the wrong thing.
And that wet weather continued right into spring. AgDay national reporter Betsy Gibbon traveling to Swanton, Ohio in May as part of our I-80 planning tour, but there wasn't much planning going on.
Time is tight.
The last time I checked it in here, it was about 58 or 59 degrees.
And spring is sensitive to farmers across the Corn Belt.
You know, I'm not so much worried about the ground temperature anymore because it's bound to warm up out. Our worst thing is our fields are wet.
For John Myers
I farmed all my life. I'm 74 years old.
and his two sons, It's a saturated spring in Swanton, Ohio.
Our ground, it varies a lot from sand to clay.
Some fields covered in water, others remain muddy.
I mean, we have a mud ball here. Could you imagine if you drove a tractor over it?
All leaving their marks.
That kind of tells you how wet our ground is, and this ground is tiled.
On a spring, unlike anything John has seen in 50 years.
He's most probably 500 acres behind spraying at the moment, and every day you can add more acres to that.
USDA says Ohio was 40 points behind the 5-year average with corn planting. It's nearly 20 points behind for soybeans. But the stress this spring goes beyond weather. An escalating trade war with China and growing stockpiles of grain sending prices lower and soybeans to their lowest point in more than a decade.
We try to push the pencil a little harder, and you know, it seems like the markets just keep going down, and other countries had good crops, carryovers there. China simply doesn't need our grain right now.
President Trump and Ag Secretary Sonny Perdue promising success.
Our trade affairs are not cooperating. There's just no markets for soybeans. I mean, there's absolutely no markets. We are sit here, we don't know what to think or what to do. I mean, we really don't.
And while these may be situations John's sons haven't seen in their farming career.
Well, you know, I think that a year like this could maybe teach them more than 10 years of good times.
They're working through a taxing spring, one they hope doesn't end with them fully underwater. Reporting in Swanton, Ohio, I'm Betsy Gibbon.
A late planting season added up to a late harvest season, and in some cases, the issues may last well into next year. An update as we continue our look at the top stories of 2019 next on this special edition of AgDay. The widespread flooding in 2019 and late planting also meant that harvest would fall behind. USDA extending crop progress reports well into December as farmers continue to work. Reporting on December 9th that 92% of the corn crop was harvested in 18 states surveyed. Hardest hit, North Dakota, which only managed to get 43% of the corn harvested. But there were also struggles in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Iowa. National reporter Betsy Gibbon takes us to Hamburg, Iowa, a river town that could face challenges well into 2020.
Combines run behind in Sidney, Iowa, as Jeff Jorgensen remains prompt, getting back to harvest after a short rain delay.
We got to get started. All of a sudden, it'll be the 1st of November before we know it.
He hasn't been at harvest too long. His early planted crop on higher ground so far raking in surprisingly good yields.
I think our yields are going to be pretty strong. I mean, pretty solid for area. I think we'll get close to our APHs on a lot of it. We did have a fair amount of prevent plant that we had this year.
This year has been tough for farmers in the southwest corner of the state. Jorgensen running machinery roughly 10 miles north of Hamburg, Iowa, a town submerged back in March with levees breached along the Missouri River. The town still shows scars from spring as sandbags wait on the streets. Road construction stands nearby and land sits covered by water. Michael Stenzel is harvesting outside of the town, a surprise after the spring he describes in one word.
Hell. Plain and simple.
These are his grain bins in town, which busted during March after floodwaters ravished the town. They still stand today with grain.
Still sitting there, rotten, decaying, smelling.
He is looking into federal disaster aid relief passed by Congress, but he doesn't know if he will receive any or which amount just yet.
Payment limitations is $125,000. The way I figured it, I lost close to $460,000. I'm not going to complain because they didn't have to give us anything.
This is during a time of struggling net farm income. A panel of economists met earlier in October for a Farm Foundation Forum panel. The panel discussed of the $88 billion in net farm income forecast for 2019, $33 billion is due to federal support payments, including MFP, WIP, and farm safety net programs, and crop insurance. Though the dip in net farm income has fallen for many reasons.
Net farm income in 2019 has fallen by more than 40% from 2013.
Back in Iowa, while Jorgensen and Stenzel harvest some of the ground, farmers can't get to every piece of land.
A lot of these guys are ready to go to work and get their ground put back in condition, start farming. But there's some of it they haven't been able to do anything with yet.
Sorry about the smell.
One of those farmers includes Mike Woltemat's ground in Hamburg, right where the breach occurred.
We want to get out and tend our fields, and get, the weeds down, and there's some places we can't get to.
Harvesting or not, one question remains with all three of these farmers. Will crop insurance rates become a problem?
If the levees aren't put back to the way they were, are they going to even give us insurance? Well, I've told all of my landlords that I farm for on the river bottom that if I can't get insurance, I won't farm it.
Trying at returning to normalcy, but concerns of a lifeless fall with fields and farmers stressed if wet weather arrives again.
Unfortunately, there's a lot of talk of what it was in a year ago, and it looks real familiar. There's wet fields, and you don't want to rut things, and being able to get trucks in and out of fields.
Yet the crop there now stands at attention, ready for harvest when the weather sees fit.
Still ahead, trade. It weighed just as heavily on the minds of producers this year as the weather. We'll look at the end of the year push to get trade deals done next. Trade, also an issue that had a big impact in farm country this year. Producers getting some relief in the form of trade aid from the federal government. But the lack of a trade deal with China, Mexico, and Canada weighed heavily on the minds of farmers and ranchers and market traders. Then earlier this month, it all seemed to start to come together with an agreement in Congress on the new U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement. And the U.S. and China also saying they have agreed to a Phase 1 trade deal. The U.S. Trade Representative saying the deal with China requires structural reforms and other changes in the areas of intellectual property, technology transfer, agriculture, financial services, and currency and foreign exchange. Now, officials say the agreement also includes a commitment by China that it will make substantial additional purchases of U.S. goods and services in the coming years. As part of the agreement, the president canceled another round of tariffs that were due to go in place earlier this month. The president also saying there will be a 50% cut in the tariffs he put in place in September. Those tariffs will go from 15% to 7.5%. But the 25% tariffs on $250 billion worth of goods he imposed last year will remain. Both sides still need to sign the agreement, which we're hearing could be signed next week. And then there is the new U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement. After more than a year of wrangling, the U.S. House approving the deal earlier this month. It's expected to win approval in the Senate next month. Mexico's Senate also approving the modifications that include increased enforcement of labor and environmental rules. It still needs approval in Canada. AgDay's Betsy Gibbons spoke with industry leaders just after it was announced that there was an agreement in Congress.
Washington, D.C. may be one step closer to a U.S., Mexico, and Canada trade agreement in 2019.
We need these things to get done.
House Democrats reaching a tentative agreement with labor leaders and the White House on labor enforcement in the deal. Tentative is the key word. It needs to be ratified by Congress. NPPC says Mexico will need to vote on the revised language, if not the entire deal. Ag organizations say they hope this new tentative agreement is one step closer towards a final ratification.
Mexico and Canada take about 40% of U.S. pork exports, so it's obviously critical for them. Obviously, for export reasons, it's important for our producers, but it also demonstrates to other potential trading partners that Congress and the administration can get trade deals done.
Thanks, Betsy, and we will continue to monitor these trade deals well into the new year for you. Up next, a fire at just one plant sends ripples through the entire cattle industry. And all you have to say are the initials RFS, and it sets off a firestorm. A look at the wild year for the biofuels industry, next. A Tyson beef processing plant in Kansas, forced to shut down after a large fire, is now back open. The fire in August at the plant outside of Holcomb, Kansas, severely damaged a critical part of the plant containing the hydraulic and electrical systems. Now, the plant has a slaughter capacity of 6,000 head per day, accounting for 5% of all U.S. fed cattle packing capacity. After the fire, cattle had to be diverted to the company's other beef facilities in an effort to help minimize problems to producers and customers. It sent cattle prices plummeting for a short time before stabilizing and trending higher through the last weeks of the year. The EPA set off a firestorm of debate in the biofuels industry after granting several small refinery waivers this year. There was even more concern after the EPA announced a plan to recalculate blending requirements based on past Department of Energy recommendations on the waivers, not the EPA's actual decisions on them. One expert told a congressional panel this year 19 ethanol plants have been forced to idle or close since the spring of 2018 due to weak or negative margins. Michelle Rook reports the decisions come at a sensitive time for the biofuels industry.
The EPA's recent renewable fuel standard proposal has been a real disappointment to the biofuels industry, falling well short of the president's promise. In Trump's deal, EPA was to reallocate biofuels volumes from the 85 small refinery exemptions granted in the past 3 years. But their 2020 RFS proposal uses flawed Department of Energy recommendations.
This is not the first time that we've heard one thing from the president and seen something completely different from EPA. We had some kind of touch and go moments on the E15 rulemaking, a real disconnect between the Oval Office and EPA.
EPA was also charged to use a 3-year rolling average of lost biofuels volumes.
That in total volume was 4 billion gallons. The average of that over the 3 years is 1.35 billion gallons. The deal we thought we had was that 1.35 billion gallons, the average of actual volume exempted those years, would be added on to the 2020 RVO.
Senators, including Mike Rounds, were in on the biofuels deal and have been pushing the president.
And what EPA has now been told is you put your rules together in such a fashion that you honor the 15 billion gallons.
Biofuels supporters also provided thousands of comments on the proposed rule to EPA.
They've got the chance to fix it, and the fact is we can do better moving forward, and I think they know that, but they need to listen to what was said and then agree, and go back and fulfill the promises that were made.
But even if EPA follows the deal, the ethanol industry loses 2.7 billion gallons of mandated ethanol that will never be reallocated.
This deal would not address that lost volume. It would simply, look forward and hopefully stop the bleeding.
Meanwhile, the industry is looking at exports to make up for the lost demand, with Mexico the brightest spot.
Mexico, back in 2017, allowed E10 through most of the country. So 2/3 of the country right now can use E10, and that's about 800 million gallons a year in new demand.
Ethanol is a quick fix to gas prices near $4 a gallon in Mexico, but is a longer-term solution overall. And China was a big customer until the trade war and 70% tariff on U.S. ethanol imports. So the hope is for the trade deal to reopen that market. I'm Michelle Rook reporting for AgDay.
Still ahead, some of the best stories of 2019. The stories of farmers helping farmers. That's ahead next. There have been a number of concerns in farm country this year, but in the tough times, we've also seen the best of us. Like in October in the plains, when a snowstorm and freezing temperatures spelled the end of the growing season, many farmers racing to get a crop in ahead of the storm. Now, one farmer in eastern Idaho got some helping hands. A bunch of farmers helped a neighbor with harvesting his russet Burbank potatoes in Hamer, Idaho before the storm hit. You see a fleet of harvesters, windrowers, and trucks arriving to dig potatoes. Now, some farmers and crews worked feverishly, one telling AgDay he stayed up for 36 hours straight just to get the potatoes out of the ground.
It was really heartwarming, and it did kind of put a lump in my throat to see the support from the community to help a fellow farmer in need. And I think this represents the agricultural industry as a whole.
Larson told us the crew successfully helped to harvest the whole crop. And how about all those farmers who helped those hit by flooding this year, many organizing drives for supplies and to get hay to those who needed it most in places like Nebraska. Donations coming in from across the country, including this one from Kentucky, a statewide effort to donate rolls of hay, feed, fencing, supplies, and other necessities organized by Kentucky Extension agents and one passionate farmer. Frida Smith lives in Owen County, Kentucky. Her husband had recently passed away and she sold her cattle. She had close to 600 rolls of hay on her farm and no cattle to eat it, so she donated it to Nebraska farmers in need.
She called me up and said she seen on the news what was going on in Nebraska and wants to help them out. Said she had several loads of hay that she wanted to donate and was asking how I could help her get it out there. So I called my district boss and made some phone calls, and next thing I know, we decided to do a statewide drive.
Makes me feel proud to be a Kentuckian and associated with agriculture.
And those are just two examples of all of the good in farm country from the past year. Here's hoping that spirit of goodwill carries into a new year. That's all the time we have this morning on Ag Day. From all of us here, I'm Clinton Griffiths. Have a happy new year.